All right. All right. It's late. It's Panther-Lair After Dark. We don't know if things are working or not. We double check on the stream, but I think we are live here for a Panther-Lair post-game show. And I didn't drink during the game. I don't know about you. I suspect you probably did. I'd try to not try. I mean, I'm successful at staying sober during Pitt games. I don't drink during Pitt games because I got to work and focus on things and try to pay attention to what I'm seeing and try and recall what I'm seeing. And I know that I'm going to do a podcast afterwards, so I don't want to be 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 beers in before I even hit, go live on YouTube. So I tend to keep it. I tend to stay sober during the games, I guess is what I say. But the game is over, so we're going to crack a hazy IPA from Arx, our friends at Arx. It is outstanding beer. It's good stuff. And I got to say, it's deserved after that game. After we all sat through Pitt playing Georgia Tech, a game that went 7 hours and 45 minutes, roughly, thereabouts. Seemed endless at times. Somehow only like 14 or 15 penalties were called in this game. And yet it felt like 51 or 52. And I gotta say straight out, and I mean, welcome to the show. We appreciate everybody's rolling in here on the live stream. We're live on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com for our post-game podcast, our post-game show. We tape it live. We appreciate everybody who jumps in. You can get in the comments. You can get in the questions. You can ask questions, make comments, get in the conversation, and then we'll release the podcast on Friday. And appreciate everybody who jumps in. And I gotta say, I mean, my first reaction, you tell me the first thing I'm thinking in the aftermath of this game, and I'll tell you what it is. Thank God it's over. And that applies to the game, and that applies to the season. And I'm I don't want to sit here and complain about having football games. I love football. I love watching football. I love covering football. I enjoy it. I mean, I have legal pads that I fill up with notes during the games, and I'm writing on the backs of sheets. That sheet was blank, but I have another sheet that I was writing on the back of little notes from the first half. I mean, I really do enjoy it. But man, this year has been such a slog, and it's been such a grind in ways that other years haven't. And that's, partially with what has happened with the team, because it's a grind covering a team that goes through some of the things that Pitt went through, and then obviously just the grind of 2020. It's been a slog to get through this thing, and it's been that way since March, and it's certainly been that way throughout the season. And now it's finally over, and maybe there'll be a bowl game, maybe there won't. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm guessing Pitt will get invited to a bowl game, provided more games don't get canceled, and that's really that's probably the biggest question mark is, how many bowl games are actually going to take place outside of your New Year's Six and your college football playoff games. And once you figure that out, then we'll see if Pitt actually ends up in one of them, Boca Raton or, Annapolis or someplace like that. And we'll probably have a post-game podcast after that, if they end up in one of those games. And so maybe there'll be one more football game, but somehow this game against Georgia Tech here tonight on Thursday night, this 34-20 game, just was sort of perfectly fitting as an end to the 2020 football season. It wouldn't have felt right. And I mean, it would have been a good boost into the offseason, but it wouldn't have felt right. It would not have felt right if Pitt had come out and just sort of like thumped Georgia Tech, kind of the way they did against Virginia Tech, or kind of the way they did after they worked out some kinks against Florida State. If Pitt had come out and just beat up on Georgia Tech, and their first drive they score a touchdown. They scored touchdowns on their first 2 drives, instead of a field goal and a turnover on downs. And then Kenny Pickett on like the 3rd or 4th drive, whatever it was, hits Jared Wayne wide open for another one, and they're up 21-0 or 21-7, and they just keep rolling from there. It would have been a nice boost into the offseason, but I can't say it would have been a fitting finale for this season. This season deserved to end on a game where Pitt played down to the level of its competition, refused to put its competition away, and actively decided not to put another team away, and eventually pulled out a 34-20 win, largely on the back of one individual performance, which is Vincent Davis, who was outstanding. One of the best performances we've seen by a Pitt running back. No, not one of. It was the best performance we've seen by a Pitt running back since the 2018 season. And actually, yardage-wise, it was the best performance we've seen by a Pitt running back since the 2017 season, when Darren Hall had 254 against Duke. Remember that 2017 game? He had like a 90-yard run or 99-yard touchdown run, something like that. He ended up with 254 yards. First time a Pitt running back. Now, let me get Davis's stats just to make sure we have the official numbers here. Vincent Davis finishes with 247 yards on 25 carries. That's the most in a game by a Pitt running back since Darren Hall in 2017. First 200-yard game by a Pitt running back since Quadri Olson in 2018, the Virginia Tech game. And it's actually the first, Pitt finished with 317 rushing yards. It's the first time Pitt's had more than 200 rushing yards since the Sun Bowl in 2018. So basically, in what may or may not be the final game for Mark Whipple in calling this offense, and I don't know if it is. We'll see what the future holds. But he finally got a 200-yard rushing game for the first time since he came to Pitt. And, I mean, I don't think you can say enough about Vincent Davis. On a night where the passing game was not clicking, the passing game was not looking very good. The passing game was not performing at a very high level. I mean, Kenny Pickett goes 17 of 34 for a $196, 1 touchdown and 1 pick. Could have had a couple more picks. Also could have had a couple more touchdowns if his, he had at least 2 just overthrown, wide open, clear touchdown passes, one to Jared Wayne and one to Jordan Addison, that if he connects on those, he's got at least 3 touchdowns in the game, and he's probably, clears 250, 300, passing yards, somewhere around there. And then, he had probably a few more that were, at least a couple more that were dropped. I don't think he played well in this game. He made a couple key plays. He definitely made some plays with his legs. But, I mean, this game was all about Vincent Davis, and particularly at the end. You know what I mean? You go on that final drive, and Davis was absolutely huge. He gets a 2nd and 7 as his first carry, and he bounces it outside. It looks like he's bottled up. He bounces it outside, runs for 8 yards, gets past the lead sticks, and then slides to make sure he stays in bounds so the clock keeps going. And then he has the 2nd and 9 play, 2 snaps later, runs for 12 yards. And, I mean, it looked like he was going to be stopped for no gain. And he just kept pushing the pile. He just kept moving and running with more power than we've seen him run with maybe ever in his career at Pitt. I mean, he just looked absolutely outstanding. And the next play, it's on a first down. He runs for 9 yards, again, pushing the pile. And they just kept chipping away until, of course, he had the 38-yard touchdown run, which I think the announcers made a good point that he was, looking back, trying to find out, hey, coaches, should I slide or do you want me to go all the way in for the touchdown? And it seems like they encouraged him to score, although it certainly could have ended the game if he had just taken a knee or, slid because Georgia Tech at that point was out of timeouts, so Pitt could have run things down, and that could have ended the game without needing to see Georgia Tech go down the field and potentially score a touchdown to get within 1 score. But that's neither here nor there. 9 plays, 75 yards, 4 minutes and 1 second on that final drive that Pitt ran. And, I mean, DJ Turner had a 3-yard sweep. Kenny Pickett had a quarterback sneak when he went under center, ran for 3 yards to pick up a 3rd and 1. But otherwise, the rest of it was all Vincent Davis. And like I say, one of the best – not one of, but it was the best performance by a Pitt running back since the 2018 season. And something we haven't seen out of Davis in his career at Pitt, something we haven't seen out of Pitt's running backs, any of them, in the last 2 seasons. So if you want to look for high notes or bright spots, that's certainly one of them right there. You can definitely look at Vincent Davis and say, boy, he played really well. He had an outstanding game. And put up huge numbers, obviously, when you average 9.9 yards per carry, 25 carries for 247 and a touchdown. You wonder how he didn't end up with more touchdowns. But even still, with that outstanding individual performance, this feels like it should have been a game that was like, 44-20 or 54-20 with the points that were left on the field. I mean, you look at just Pitt's, you look in the first half, they had 4 possessions where they got inside the 12, and they came away with 9 points on those 4 possessions where they got inside the 12. 9 points, 3 field goals, and a turnover on downs. 4 trips to the red zone in the first half, and they end up with 3 field goals on it. It's just not, 305 yards. They had 305 yards in the first half, and they scored 16 points. You went 3 of 11 on third down. Kenny Pickett was 12 of 26 for 171 and a touchdown and a pick. Yeah, it was a perfectly fitting close to this season because they didn't look very good. They really didn't, outside of Vincent Davis and obviously Patrick Jones was a beast again. But as a whole, Pitt didn't look very good. There were questionable decisions. The time management, the clock management at the end of the first half was absolutely questionable when you get the ball at the 50 with 1:09 left to go and you gain all of a net 2 yards ultimately after a couple of sacks. Actually less than, a net minus yards when you add in the Davis Bevel sack. But, even I think at its best, they only gained 11 or 12 yards in a minute with all 3 timeouts. I don't understand how that happens. And sort of the same thing, Pitt's, I guess it was their third drive of the second half. Things were going pretty slow, but Georgia Tech had just scored, and they ran that 2-point play, which was the Pitt special / Philly special play, which they executed pretty well, though their quarterback did more of the Philly special and ran out to the end of the end zone, whereas, Pickett on the Pitt special kind of ran just sort of through the offensive line up into the middle. But either way, overturn on pass interference, blah, blah, blah. But the score is 23-13. Pitt drives down to the 16. They get to the Georgia Tech 16 and ran 9 plays from there. And on those 9 plays, 7 of them were running plays. The other 2, one was a 2-yard pass to Jordan Addison, and the other was the play where Kenny Pickett ended up scrambling out of bounds, a late hit out of bounds, and then a conduct penalty on Pitt. And I just remember looking at that, and it's 23-13. 23-13, you're not exactly in safe territory here. It's still, it's early in the fourth quarter at that point, and a field goal is cool. A field goal is good. It extends your lead, but it only extends it to 13 points. You're only up by 2 scores. And I mean, okay, you want to say, well, Georgia Tech probably isn't going to score 2 touchdowns. They're probably not going to drive the field. That's fine. But they kind of did. On the very next drive, they got deep into Pitt territory. And they ended up scoring a touchdown. And, it just seems to me that you need to, we always talk about being conservative. You always talk about needing to be more aggressive. But in that situation, when you're up by 10 early in the fourth quarter, even if you're confident your defense isn't going to give anything up, you still need to at least attempt to score a touchdown to give yourself that extra cushion. There's a big difference in 30-13 as opposed to 26-13. 26-13 lets the other team go ahead with 2 touchdowns, which, again, it's unlikely Georgia Tech was going to drive the field twice. But you want to protect it. Weird things can happen in these games. And I think you want to protect against that and be more aggressive. And like I say, Georgia Tech did score. They scored on the very next possession and made it a 6-point game. Unfortunately for Pitt, they were able to take the ball. Like I said, that drive I just described, take the ball with 6 minutes left. They run 4 minutes off the clock. They go 75 yards on 9 plays, which probably is, fewer plays in less time than they hoped for. But when you get a 38-yard touchdown run, that's going to happen. But I don't know. Like I said, it was sort of a perfect finish to this season where they didn't really play all that well. They had 1 or 2 guys really play at a high level, questionable decisions, and ultimately they ended up beating a lesser opponent. Oh, and the officiating was horrible too. and I say this isn't one of those cases where you're complaining about the officiating, you're blaming the result of a game on the officials because the team you cover, the team you root for lost. Pitt benefited from some terrible calls throughout this game. Georgia Tech got the shaft on a lot of calls and non-calls, it seemed. It seemed like things were working. Some of them, there were bad penalties on both sides, but I think Georgia Tech definitely has more valid of a complaint than Pitt when it comes to griping about the officiating. But overall, it's sort of a fitting finish to the season. 6-5. Bad, blowout losses to the 2 best teams on your schedule. Losses to the 3 best teams on your schedule, if you want to include Miami. Beat up on the worst teams on your schedule. This one, today, Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, Florida State, Syracuse, Austin Peay. Louisville, whatever you want to say about them. losses to two teams that probably are ultimately, I think every year you find those teams that are right around your level, and those are the games that ultimately determine sort of what your season becomes. And it turns out, Boston College and NC State are right around the level that Pitt probably wanted to be at this season, or maybe right around the level that Pitt is at this season. And they lost those two games, which puts them on the bottom side of the ledger, so to speak. And 6-5 seems like right around where they should be, and if they go to a bowl game, they get a chance to go 7-5, and that's where you sit. You come out of 2020 with a 7-5 record, and we're not going to go too far down the path of trying to render a judgment on what that means, what it means for Pitt football, what it means for Pat Narduzzi, what it means for anything. We're not going to try and go big picture on that 7-5 record just yet. We've got a lot of time for that, and I think it's going to take some time to look back on the season and make a judgment on what it is because of all the complicating factors that went into it. And I don't think you can ignore those factors. I don't think you can blame everything on those factors, but you can't ignore them. I'm not ready, though, as we sit here just after 11 o'clock on December 10th, 2020, less than an hour after the regular season finale ended. I'm not ready to render a judgment just yet. I have to think a little bit more about what I believe the impact was, the COVID impact and what it means for this team and what it meant for this season. All right, let's jump into the comments, though, and the questions. Got a lot of people here on the live stream, and I appreciate that. As always, I don't know how long we'll go tonight with the podcast, and we'll talk for a while until we get tired of talking, right? I think that's probably the best way to go. I always try to shoot for an hour with the podcasts, but, this one, I feel like it's a little bit, it is what it is, to use a horrible coaching cliche. A lot of the first comments here are people jumping right in about Jeff Collins, the Georgia Tech coach, who I actually kind of like. I kind of like his style. But yeah, the blow-off with Pat Narduzzi, I don't know if you caught the post-game handshake. They showed a replay of it like 2 or 3 times where Narduzzi tried to say a few words with Jeff Collins, and Collins gave sort of a quick cursory handshake and took off, and Narduzzi seemed a bit steamed about it and seemed to be shouting to Jeff Collins, actually, to call after him. I'm not sure what was going on there. I jumped right into the live stream here right after the game, so I didn't go to the Narduzzi press conference. I wonder if he addressed that. We'll have to check in on that a little bit later. But, I think he had some gripes about the officiating, and the officiating was bad in this game. And I think he had some legitimate gripes. If he wants to complain about not getting a pass interference on the fake spike play at the end of the game, I can kind of understand where he's coming from. Looks like it probably should have been pass interference on that play. Are they still going to recover an onside kick and go down the field and score another touchdown to win the game? Probably not. But, yeah, on that play, he should have had a pass interference. I think he had some gripes. I don't know if he necessarily needs to take it out on Pat Narduzzi, but I guess if you're mad, you don't want to talk to anybody. So I can kind of understand that. Let's scroll down here and see what's going on, what the comments are. Roman, our good friend Roman, chiming in. Roman, I feel like we haven't seen you on many of the podcasts lately, so I'm glad you're here on the post-game show. It says Vincent Davis is here to stay. A few thoughts on Vincent Davis, right? Because he's the star of this game today. 247 rushing yards, 25 carries, touchdown, 10 yards per carry. Vincent Davis, I think Vincent Davis's skill set is well known. You know what I think if you want to say he's a smaller back, not a power back, but he's got a lot of speed, I don't think you're wrong about that at all. I think what the key with Vincent Davis is he needs some blocking. And this is not a knock on Vincent Davis. Most running backs need some blocking. If you don't block very well for running backs, then you're not going to get a lot out of them. And I think you can look at, the course of Quadri Olson's career, the course of Darren Hall's career. When they had the best running, I shouldn't say the best running O-line of their career, because the group in 2016 was pretty good. But in 2018, they had a very good rushing line, a line that was very good at run blocking. And when they had those guys, Hall and Olson went off, and had a great season. And it's not just about the offensive linemen. Those guys played well as seniors, Olson and Hall. But I think what you saw in this game, up until that last drive, which I think, Vincent Davis made a lot of those things on that last drive happen on his own. But I think what you saw in this game was some really good run blocking. I think they blocked well for Vincent Davis and gave him a little bit of a crack, gave him some space to get through and really get into the second level where he can make things happen. I think that's where Vincent Davis does his damage, is when he gets a chance to get to the second level. And once he does, he can be really explosive. He can be a really exciting player. But he needs that help, because look, he's not going to get that much bigger. He's not going to get that much stronger. He is who he is, but who he is a workable back, a serviceable back, a back who can make plays like that 74-yard run, or the 38-yard touchdown run, or the 30-yard run, the 12-yard this run, that run. And yeah, he showed some power on the last drive, but it's still, I think you still want a complementary back to go with him. Someone like, they tried to use A.J. Davis in that role this year. I don't know if I don't think that was a good fit for him. I don't know if Izzy Abanikanda can be the complementary back. I'm really intrigued by Malik Newton, the freshman who's coming in, who's a bigger back out of Virginia, and he's big, but he's explosive. I think more explosive than A.J. Davis. So I think that's going to be really intriguing to see. I do think Vincent Davis probably should have been the lead back all along this season, and I think for the most part he was. You look at carries, you look at starts, he was getting the most opportunities, but I think he probably could have even stood to have more. But again, when you're not getting much in the way of push up front, it's going to be hard for you to make a lot happen. He was getting more push today. There was more to work with, and I think he made the most of it. And he had a hell of a game. He had his best game of his career. Absolutely. Let's see. Grant Newport says, why did Pat Narduzzi take a defensive timeout up 14 with like 15 seconds left? Grant, are you new here? First time watching a Pitt game, Grant? When that defensive timeout was called in the fourth quarter with like 15 seconds left, I was not in the least bit surprised. I was not surprised at all. I was surprised that there hadn't been more defensive timeouts. Pat Narduzzi can't help himself. He can't help himself but call a defensive timeout. And I get it. You're a defensive coach. You look out there and you say, oh man, we're not prepared for this kind of play or that kind of play. I think this is what they're going to try and do. I think that's what they're going to try and do. We're not ready for it. Call a timeout. Get over here. We got to retool this. But that's what he does. He calls defensive timeouts. And that is the least shocking thing that happened in this game. In a game full of surprises, that was one of the least surprising, Grant. So, yeah, I don't know if you've watched Pitt. No, I'm sure you've watched Pitt before. Why would you be tuning into this podcast if you haven't watched Pitt before? But yeah, that's a common occurrence. Jason Martell, I couldn't watch the game, but I started following along late in the fourth quarter, and from Twitter and the Panther-Lair, that game sounded ridiculous. Yes, Jason, it was. It was ridiculous. Michael Cosentino follows up, that game should have never been that close. And that's true. I think absolutely, it shouldn't have been that close. They should have put this team away right from the start. You know what I mean? They should have had 3 touchdowns in the first quarter. They should have had a 21-0 lead or 21-7 lead or something like that in the first quarter. It shouldn't have been as close as it was. I absolutely agree with you. And But and I'll come back to sort of what I've been saying here. It was sort of fitting that it did go down the way it did, because that's what this team has been this season. It's what they were last season. And this was a common talking point for me before the season, early in the season. Those first 3 games when they were actually winning games before they went on the losing streak. And early in the season, I said things like, you can't keep playing these games close. You let these teams hang around, Louisville or Syracuse or whoever it was. You keep playing these games close, it's going to come back and bite you. And I used, as the next few weeks came around, I used NC State and Boston College as examples where, oh yeah, you keep playing these games close and it comes back to bite you. This was one where that potential was there, where it could have happened. That you played it close. You let them hang around. Somewhat intentionally with conservative play calling, especially late in the game in the fourth quarter, but then just poor execution and some questionable play calling early in the game, where you just wonder, what are you doing? Why is second down such an issue for this offense? Why is it so hard to call plays for this offense on second down? Maybe it's because they run for no gain on first down, throw incomplete passes on first down, so they're sitting and looking at 2nd and 10, 2nd and 9, 2nd and 11 a lot, and it's tricky to call plays in those situations. But I'm pretty sure the Wildcat is almost never a good idea on 2nd and 8 or 2nd and 9. I mean, but that's just me. What do I really know? TRR says winning record. Right? It is a winning record, 6-5. He also says, why in the world was Carter Warren, Jake Cradle, and Gabe Hoy starting? All three were below the line again tonight. More puzzling coaching. You know what? So I have to look at this, actually. Let me see if I can bring up the notes here. Let's see if I can find participation starters. Okay, so Matt Gonsalves actually did start at left tackle. So I with the game, I had to stream it, and it took me a little bit to get the stream going, so I missed like the opening 2 drives or something. So I didn't see who started. By the time I turned it on, Carter Warren was playing at left tackle. But yeah, Matt Gonsalves did start at left tackle, and then they sort of rotated. They kind of rotated, but kind of didn't. It was very interesting in the second half. Gonsalves started the second half, played the first drive. Carter Warren played the next 2 drives, and then for the 4th drive, which was that final drive that where they started with 6 minutes left, they started the 25, it ended with a touchdown. They had Gonsalves back out there. And look, I mean, I'm not a coach. I'm not an offensive line coach. I'm not a film analyst. I'll leave that to the people that I pay to analyze film for our site. You know what I mean? To produce some of the analytical pieces, the evaluation pieces. I pay people to do it because it's not my specialty. But I can watch out there, and number 76 seems pretty damn good. I mean, good enough that he should be starting all the time. Good enough that he probably should be the starting left tackle next year, and quite frankly, should have been played every snap today at left tackle, and maybe should have been starting earlier in the season. And that's not necessarily to knock Carter Warren. I don't want to be disrespectful to him, but Gonsalves has been really good when he's been in there. And that's for the last 2 games, the Virginia Tech game and the Clemson game, and then this game. When he played, which he split time with Warren. Warren missed those last 2 games, so Gonsalves played the whole thing against Virginia Tech and Clemson. But Warren was back here today, so they rotated against Georgia Tech. But, I mean, Gonsalves looked better, and I gave that stat. I think it was the Virginia Tech and Clemson games. Gonsalves had 112 pass block snaps, and on those 112, he gave up 0 sacks and 3 pressures. I mean, that's really good. I mean, that's what you want to be able to do. That's what Pat Narduzzi just tweeted something. I got distracted. Pat Narduzzi tweeted something. It says, cold showers in Georgia again, with a handshake emoji. Throwing a little shade, I believe. I have to ask him about that as well. But Gonsalves looked better. And has looked better. And I think that's encouraging for next season. But it raises a question about this year and why he hasn't gotten more playing time and why he didn't play more tonight. As far as that right side of the line, I'm not sure if they got the rest of the guys in, if they rotate. It looked to me like Gabe Hoy was playing right tackle the whole time. It looked like Jake Cradle was playing right guard the whole time. So not as many snaps for Carson Van Lin and Blake Zabovic. I'll have to go back and we'll rewatch the film at some point over the next couple days. But I think Gonsalves at the very least is a guy you have to get on the field. He's got to be playing more. Let's see, Brock Madonic, thoughts on the offensive line tonight, and John Morgan seems to have a ton of potential. Yeah, like I say about the O-line, and I actually started talking about this a week or so ago, that I'm really interested to see what it looks like next season. I'm intrigued by a lot of these guys, Gonsalves and Zabovic and Van Lin, to go with Gabe Hoy coming back and Jake Cradle coming back and Carter Warren coming back and Owen Drexel coming back. I feel like you're gonna figure out your center and then build out from there. And if it's Drexel, then you build out from there with you figure out your guards, you figure out your tackles. If you want to go with Jake Cradle at center, then you build out around him. You know what I mean? Maybe your guards then. I don't know. I think you got a lot of options because Gonsalves and Hoy have both played guard in the past. I think Warren potentially can move in there. I think you got a lot of options. At all the spots. And so I'm really intrigued to see how that group looks. As for John Morgan, yeah, I think he played really well. He got a lot more opportunities, a lot more playing time due to Rashad Weaver being out. I'm looking at the stat line now. He had one tackle. Oh, he had a sack, one sack. That was his recorded stats. Though if you look at the box score, he had one tackle, one solo tackle, one sack, one tackle for loss. So he really stuffed the stat sheet with that one play. But yeah, he got a lot of playing time. There again, that's a situation where, I think the defensive line will take a step back next year because they're losing Patrick Jones and Rashad Weaver. That's inevitable. You're not going to be as good without those guys as you were with those guys. That's simple reality. But that doesn't mean that I think the defensive line is necessarily going to be bad. I think Morgan is good. I think Alexandra is good. I think Habakkuk Baldonado is good. I think Deion Hayes is going to be good. You need some younger guys to develop, but I think you've got some really talented defensive ends. They might not be on the level of Jones and Weaver, but they're really talented defensive ends, and that should help that group not have too much of a drop-off. Let's see here. And Rummy says, I don't really want Pitt to play in a bowl game. Can't really put my finger on why. I mean, I know why. I mean, because, we've seen this program go to, what is it, 4 bowl games over the past 5 years, and they've lost 3, and, we're losing the 4th for all but the last 45 seconds or so. That's a pretty good reason why, because you watch them play against Georgia Tech tonight. It was not a very good team, and the game was kind of in question. Even though Pitt was sort of in control for most of it, the score was close enough that it wouldn't have taken much more than a couple weird bounces for Georgia Tech to win. That's probably why you don't want to watch another game. Is because, you don't really want to subject yourself to what potentially could happen. That's my guess. Let's see here. Jim Fiorenzo says, where was Shockey Jacques Louis tonight? And that is a good question. I don't have an answer to that. I mean, he did not record any stats. I don't think I remember seeing him get any snaps. I would have to look and see I'll have to look at the snap charts and participation and see what we can figure out there. But, I didn't see him. He was on the travel roster, so presumably he made the trip to Atlanta. But, yeah, I didn't see him in the game. Let's see. Anthony Tennyson, please, I hope they don't go to a bowl game and we have to watch more of this team this year. Yeah. I'm agreeing with you. It was, I was starting a sentence, but then I took a drink of beer. Yeah, I know I've said that I'm sort of ready for this season to be done. I know I sort of, just said that, answer somebody's question when they said, why don't I want to see this team in a bowl, is because you don't want to be disappointed again and that kind of thing. But I do think, like, if you want to talk yourself into seeing this team play in a bowl game or getting excited about seeing this team play in a bowl game, I would say you look at guys like Jordan Addison or Jalen Barden, who I didn't see much of tonight, or Vincent Davis now after his big game, or some of those younger defensive players who have gotten more opportunities in the last couple of weeks. I think those, or some of the offensive linemen that we talked about, some of those younger guys, I think those are reasons to want to see a bowl, because you'll get to see those guys play again, which should give you some optimism about the future. Now, I mean, I can understand if you don't get too optimistic about the wide receivers when they drop passes, and they're not going to have the quarterback back next year. They're going to have a new quarterback, which always raises a big question of, uncertainty, and you don't really know what's going to happen with a new quarterback. But I think there's enough young talent on this team that it could be fun to watch them play another game, just to see those guys come into their own a little bit more, see those guys develop and who can show more flashes. I think Jordan Addison very much did not play up to his expected level today. What did he finish with? 1 catch for 3 yards, and 3 rushing attempts. Or no, I'm sorry, one rush for 3 yards, 3 catches for 14 yards. On 4 targets. So, I mean, he wasn't even seeing a lot of passes. Jared Wayne and DJ Turner combined for 19 targets out of Kenny Pickett's, or out of 30 pass attempts, that were credited to as targeted, not throwaway passes, I guess. But Wayne and Turner, 19 targets, Jordan Addison 4. I think Jordan Addison would like to go out on a higher note than that. After what he's done all season and kind of the level he's played at, I think he would like to have a better final game. And I think guys like that are part of the things you would look forward to in a bowl game, if you're trying to talk yourself into it, Tony. BC Thompson says, I want to go bowling and then fire Mark Whipple. No red zone scoring has lost us a lot of games in the last 2 years. I can't deny that. I think there's a lot of issues, a lot of things that have cost Pitt wins in the last 2 seasons. But the red zone scoring is certainly chief among them. You know what I mean? I always go to the stat from the Miami game this year. 5 red zone trips and they score 1 touchdown. That's significant. That's a lot of points left on the field that just couldn't be converted because this offense couldn't score when they got inside the 20. And you want to put that on the lack of a running game. You want to put it on the lack of a tight end. You want to put it on poor execution. You want to put it on poor play calling. Take your pick out of all of those. I will accept all of those answers as a reason why Pitt can't score touchdowns in the red zone or they haven't been effective enough scoring touchdowns in the red zone. It's an area where they have to get better, and I think it's a little bit of all those things. I think it's players executing. I think it's coaches play calling. I think it's tight ends just not even existing. The only time I knew Kai Wright was even on a tight end was even on the field was when Kai Wright got an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty called on him. It's on all of the, and you want to put it on the lack of a running game. I think that plays into it as well. I think if you can't run the ball, it gets really hard, or it gets harder to score in the red zone. If your offense is totally predicated on the pass, you lose a lot of your playbook when you're only 20 yards away from the end zone. And so it gets really tricky, I think. I think there are a lot of factors that go into it. And ultimately, it's going to fall on the offensive coordinator. You know what I mean? It's going to fall on Mark Whipple. Just like the lack of a passing game and lack of quarterback development fell on Sean Watson, the lack of a red zone and lack of a running game is going to fall on Mark Whipple. And whether it costs him his job remains to be seen. I wouldn't think, I don't think there would be any staff changes until after next Wednesday, which is signing day, and then potentially after a bowl game if they do end up going to one. And, we'll see what kind of happens there. Let's see. Scrolling through here. Royce Beacom says, I prefer Boca Raton in Florida versus UCF. I was in Annapolis before. Doubt if fans will be allowed there also. Look, the first thing you want to have happen is bowl games to even be played and be televised. Going to bowl games, I wouldn't count on any of that happening. Maybe in Florida because it's Florida. But, I'm not going to a bowl game. Are you traveling to a bowl game? I'm not going anywhere. And so to me, it doesn't matter, Boca Raton or, Annapolis. I guess Boca Raton would be a nicer trip for the players just because they would be in Florida as opposed to being in Maryland. In a normal year, I like the trip to Annapolis. It's an easy drive. You can get there in 4 hours. Cruise down the turnpike and get down and get back pretty quickly. It's cool to see a game at the Navy Stadium. It's not cool to watch a team play against Navy because they do what Navy does with the blocks, the cut blocks, and the option and all that stuff. But it's a pretty easy trip to make, and Pitt has played there a decent amount of times. Regular season and postseason. I think they played there. I've gone to at least 3 Pitt Navy games at Navy. No, maybe 4. Maybe 2008. I think they were down there. 2010, 2013, and then they played the bowl game down there in 2015. So 4 times. It's great. It's easy to get to. It's a great place. A great sort of historic place to watch a game. In a normal year, though, I can't say I would argue with a trip to Boca Raton. That wouldn't be the worst thing. Let's see here. Scroll down. It's interesting. Dale Gribble's got a comment here. I think it might be asking a lot, but I really hope Kenny Pickett comes back next season. And Will Z sort of follows that up and says he should come back. Pickett is a 6th rounder at best at the moment, unless he has an unreal combine. It's interesting to see. It's interesting to see how the perception of Kenny Pickett has changed sometimes week to week, certainly over the last few weeks. I think when you looked at the Virginia Tech game, he played really well in that game, and people were really high on his pro potential and what he could become at the next level. And then you have the Clemson game, 2 weeks ago, and then this game here where Pickett didn't really play all that well. And the perception has sort of changed that maybe he's not all that as a pro prospect. My guess is that he would get drafted. I don't know how high. It depends on the situation, depends on the team. If it's the right time, could be anywhere in there. Bottom 3 rounds, I would guess, right? And then it's just a matter of how well he can adapt to the NFL, if he can kick around as a backup, or what his career could be. Obviously, Pitt would be better if he came back, I would think. Although I say that without a lot of real knowledge about what the other guys can do. I don't really know what Davis Bevel can do. I don't really know what Joey Yellen can do. We saw Davis Bevel take a snap against Georgia Tech, and he got sacked on the final play of the first half. He got thrown out there as a sacrificial lamb. I don't know why he couldn't just take a knee. I don't know why he had to take a sack. He ended up he could have just taken a knee and accomplished the same thing. I don't know what they have behind Pickett. I would still rather take my chances with a fifth-year senior quarterback who's, going as a fourth-year starter than a brand new guy. I think anybody would say that. Is it best for Pickett, though? I don't know. Maybe he feels like it's time to go. I wouldn't be surprised if he did. RJC Man 38 jumped in as a super chatter. We appreciate him as always. He says ACC needs to make sure games are not blacked out. So angry that he could not watch, had to listen on the radio. So I don't know about the blackout thing. This game was picked up. It was on AT&T Sportsnet in Pittsburgh, and basically, if you don't have that cable subscription, you're not going to be able to watch the game on ESPN. And that's the way it is. You get MLB.TV or the NHL, package, whatever they call it, where you can watch any game in the league except the ones that are in your local area, because the TV stations, the TV networks in your local area, those regional sports networks, have paid money to carry those games, and they don't want you streaming the game. They want you watching their live broadcast, so you can see their advertisements and they can get more money for the ads. They can sell ads, sell the ad space for more because they have more viewers. And so, this is always the case. This is always the case when you have it on one of these regional sports networks. That's why, you could sign up, you could subscribe to MLB.TV, and you're not going to be able to watch Pirates games if you're in Pittsburgh. It's blacked out in your local area. You're not going to be able to watch Penguins games if you're in Pittsburgh. It's blacked out in your local area. Although I think, if you have a cable subscription, then you could go onto the AT&T Sportsnet Pittsburgh website and you could stream it. Or you could obviously just watch it on your television. But this is always the case. Now, it is, unfortunate that this is with a Thursday night primetime game and they couldn't get it on ESPN. But I guess because the ACC or what should we call it, the AT&T Sportsnet Pittsburgh or whatever it's called, had the game when it was originally scheduled, they got to keep the game when it got rescheduled to tonight. So. It was blacked out, but the ACC didn't really have any control over that. That's the local regional networks doing what they always do in order to try and drive people to the actual cable channel. Let's see here. Lucky Cheaper says not throwing in the red zone with 6+ minutes left in the game and settling for a field goal was totally unacceptable for a Power 5 head coach. Yeah, I agree. And there was even more time than that because it was before it was, they got the ball back with 6 minutes and 1 second to go after Georgia Tech scored a touchdown to make it 26-20. So it was the drive before Georgia Tech's touchdown. So, you're talking early in the third quarter is Pitt's first drive, or early in the fourth quarter is Pitt's first drive of the fourth quarter, and they get down inside the red zone and they don't really even try, and that's a problem. I don't think there's any question about it. Royce Beacom chiming in on Kenny Pickett says Kenny Pickett should come back considering his performance versus Clemson. Quarterbacks don't get hurt frequently enough and what they can learn in an extra year. Yeah, it's I can't sit and I can't sit and say what Kenny Pickett should do. I mean, it's obviously a decision he has to make based on where he feels like he is and what his draft prospects are and the likelihood that he's going to get selected and if he feels like he's ready. Does he want to come back and work with the new offensive coordinator if there's a change? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, that there's a bit of a risk in that. There's also a risk in going now and not trying to get another year of college and development and film and all of those things. It's, I think these guys have a lot of people they can turn to, a lot of people who can give them advice. Kenny Pickett works with a quarterback coach who's got experience working with NFL guys and working in the NFL. And so he'll have a lot of input to consider. And obviously, Pat Narduzzi will give whatever information he can, make the decision. That's a tough call for me to opine on what Kenny Pickett should do. Chris Bruno jumping in as a super chatter. We always get to your comments and questions. If you are a super chatter, you can click that little $sign there, support the podcast, contribute a little bit, and we'll always get to your stuff. Chris Bruno says, how excited were you about the Josh Fogg reference? Yeah, man. Any shot we get a Zach Duke reference next year. Yeah, I mean, that was awesome, the Josh Fogg reference. Who knew that Vincent Davis went to the same high school as former Pirates pitcher Josh Fogg? And how about the announcers on the television broadcast mentioning Josh Fogg and talking about his time as a Rocky? Brother, what about the Pirates? Now, I can understand you brought him up because he went to the same high school as Vincent Davis, but you're not going to talk about the fact that he played for the Pirates? And here's the other thing. I need to look this up, but is Josh Fogg really the most famous Cardinal Gibbons alum that they could come up with? You know what I mean? They were like, Vincent Davis went to Cardinal Gibbons. Interesting. Let's see. Who do they got on their alumni list? I'm going to have to look this up because is there really no one better than Josh Fogg that they could come up with when they listed the alumni from Cardinal Gibbons? I mean, maybe not. Maybe Josh Fogg. And hey, I mean, I would claim Josh Fogg too. If I was Cardinal Gibbons, I would claim Josh Fogg. They'd probably be claiming Vincent Davis after this game tonight though. Let's see here. What else we got? Oh, Chris Bruno had another comment. He said, this coaching staff makes decisions almost every game that I feel like I could handle better when I played video games as a kid. Look, I mean, I can't disagree. I mean, I don't know if I can agree with you about your ability as a video game player when you were a child, but I can't disagree about some of those calls, some of those decisions. There are things that happen that you're just like, what? Why? No. Why would you do that? That's not the high percentage play here. That's not the thing that makes the most sense here. And I will say, look, I mean, you guys are like me. I mean, we watch a lot of football, right? We watch football every Saturday. We watch football every Sunday. See a lot of things. See a lot of games. And probably see something in every game where you're like, what? Why would you do that? You know, I mean, we were watching a Steeler game a couple of weeks ago, and my 6-year-old is sitting there saying, why aren't they throwing it in the end zone? You know, they're like that at the 10, and they keep throwing passes that are short of the goal line. He's like, why aren't they throwing it into the end zone? Or why aren't they throwing it for a touchdown? And I'm like, even you get it. You know, I think there are questionable decisions in every game. I think sometimes we underestimate sort of the pressure and stress that comes with being in a game. I mean, you're in the middle of a game, you're heat of the moment, quick decisions, and not everybody makes great decisions under pressure. I don't make great decisions under pressure. If you put me in to a football game as a coach and I had to make a decision on this or a decision on that, I'd probably make wrong decisions a lot too. Coaches have a short amount of time to make some decisions that we all sit back on the couch and think about for a while and say, well, that wasn't right or that was right. And sometimes we even say it in the moment. No, you don't do this. In this situation, you go for it. I knew on that drive after it was 23-13 that they really should be aiming for a touchdown and not just playing for a field goal, because playing for a field goal keeps you within 2 scores. Playing for a touchdown, if you get it, puts you up by 3 scores. I knew that in the moment, but clearly Pitt had a different philosophical approach. So I think there's a lot of factors that go into it, for sure. Let's see here. Steven, same last name as Roman, says Pitt should run it up on Georgia Tech next year, but I don't think the offense is capable of that. Well, hey, man, you saw what they did at Virginia Tech, right? I mean, they're capable of putting some points. You saw what they did to Austin Peay. They could put some points up. I don't know if Pitt has any personal beef with Georgia Tech. Just because Jeff Collins blew off Pat Narduzzi a little bit, I don't think there's a personal beef between the programs. It did seem to be a chippy game, though. I mean, these guys were getting in each other's face quite a bit. You know, I mean, with some of the penalties. When Kenny Pickett got his late hit out of bounds penalty, it was kind of funny because he the guy hit him. I mean, it was a cheap call. It was totally a cheap call. But the guy hit him, and then the flag came out, and Pickett started laughing. It got right in the defender's face and started talking to him and talking stuff to him. And defender didn't like it very much because he knew he just cost his team 15 yards or half the distance of the goal or whatever you want to call it. And I think Jimmy Morrissey and some of those other guys got involved at that point because, you're not going to let somebody get in your quarterback's face. But it was getting a little chippy out there. I mean, guys were going at it a little bit. I don't know if there's any specific dislike that, next year they're going to be like, man, I cannot wait to play Georgia Tech because I hate those guys, or vice versa with Georgia Tech players saying that about Pitt. I think you should go into every game with the intention of running up the score and believing that you can score a lot and trying to score a lot. I think that should probably be your approach in every game. Let's see here. Nicholas Temperio says Matt Gonsalves looks like a future All-ACC tackle. It would be nice to see Bryce Hargrove decide to play one more year. Pitt may be developing some offensive linemen. Yeah, I thought Hargrove played well tonight. I think that whole left side of the line was playing well. Particularly when it was Hargrove and Gonsalves. I thought those guys were blocking well, both in the pass and in the run. It is unfortunate. I mean, I think you'd like to have both of those guys back, Jimmy Morrissey and Bryce Hargrove, both of those senior offensive linemen. If you could bring those guys back, I think Pitt coaches would love to have them. I don't think either guy is coming back. I think they were both introduced at senior day for the Virginia Tech game a couple of weeks ago. And I mean, I think that's pretty much it for them. But yeah, absolutely, you'd love to have those guys back and try to keep a little more continuity in the offensive line while you develop some of the younger players. Now you'll just develop more of the younger players and get those guys out there. But the upside is, I guess a lot of those guys that we talked about, when I mentioned 6 or 7 guys you're going to have to consider for next year, you have Gonsalves and Warren, you have, Jake Cradle and Blake Zabovic and Carson Van Lin and Gabe Hoy and Owen Drexel. They're all experienced players. They've all got varying levels of experience. I mean, Drexel probably has the least, having played, really just the Boston College game when Jake Cradle was out, Jimmy Morrissey moved to right guard, and Drexel stepped in at this starting center position. He's probably got the least experience out of those guys, but still he's got some game snaps under his belt. You know what I mean? He's got some playing time on his resume, which is big. I think that can go a long way. And so you're bringing in a lot of experienced guys next year to fill these spots that are going to be left open and really to build your offensive line around. I think the coaches will be able to pick their 5 best guys sort of regardless of position and then fit them in as need be. Let's see here. Brock Madonic, any word why Damar Hamlin didn't travel with the team? Is his career done at Pitt? Yeah, Damar Hamlin's done at Pitt. He got introduced and recognized at senior day. And I believe him and Rashad Weaver both, if you want to call it, opted out of the final game of the season or left the team for the final game of the season, or, I think quite possibly had training plans in place that they might have made earlier this fall. That they were going to get started once they were finished with the Clemson game. They were going to move right into training and NFL draft prep. Pitt's fall semester had already ended or has already ended. It ended early. They changed the schedule around. And, so those guys might have made plans to be training. And when Pitt's schedule got changed, when the football schedule got changed and the Georgia Tech game got postponed to the 10th, it sort of potentially conflicted with maybe some of the training plans those guys had. And so I think that probably is why Rashad Weaver and Damar Hamlin didn't travel with the team to Georgia Tech for this game. And yeah, their Pitt careers are over, and good luck to them at the next level. Let's see here. Scroll down. We just got a few more minutes here. Leon Moore 23 says, I like Kenny, but time to move on. Need a very athletic runner at quarterback, a Pat White type. Be great to pick up a kid who other big schools overlook. Get our wide receiver coach on it. Well, I'm not sure you're really going to get a Pat White type. I think, Mark Whipple or whoever the sorry, I got distracted. Somebody is in here, and they're very upset about they bet the under in the second half. And Vincent Davis's touchdown run very much disturbed or threw off that bet. What were we talking about? Kenny Pickett. Oh, and running quarterbacks and Pat White. I would think that, Mark Whipple or whatever offensive coordinator Pat Narduzzi would hire would, I don't think they would want a Pat White quarterback. I think they want someone who can throw with the ability to get out and run. I think Kenny Pickett's got some of that athletic ability. I think, I think Kenny Pickett can run enough, and I think that's probably the kind of quarterback they would like to get. I think that's the kind of quarterback you would like to have in today's day and age. A guy with a strong enough arm, a decent passer, who can run when the play breaks down, and occasionally run design quarterback runs if you need them to. I mean, I think Kenny Pickett's got a lot of the skill sets that you look for a quarterback in 2020. And I think if you're going to be Pitt and play the kind of offense that I think they want to play, he's a really good fit for it physically. He's got the physical skills to fit pretty well with it. I think you could always get a guy whose arm is a little bigger or who's a little faster when he runs. But I think Kenny Pickett is a good blend of those skills. Davis Bevel is probably another guy who's kind of mobile. We've seen Nick Patty run around a little bit. I don't know if Joey Allen is quite as mobile as Davis Bevel. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what quarterback they go with next year and what they can actually do, or if the quarterback they go with next year is on the roster right now, because there's always the transfer market that they could dig into and see what they could find. Leon Moore 23 says, take the 2 losses from the ACC where we would have played Marshall and Ohio, and we are 7-5 or 8-4 again. Need to be big time. Take the 2 losses from the ACC where we would have played Marshall and Ohio. I think what you're saying is if you take out the BC and NC State games and replace them with the Marshall and Ohio games that Pitt was supposed to play, if you did that, instead of 6-5, they'd be 6-3, and you could add in the 2, the Ohio and Marshall, and you end up at 8-3, right? So I think that'd be a pretty good season. I mean, it depends on what that other game would be. I guess what would that other game be? Anyway, I don't know. It doesn't. We could play the what if game on the schedule, and if the schedule hadn't changed, or if this or that. But I mean, we're pretty far down the pike here. I mean, we've seen an entire season. We've seen a full 11-game season for this program, for this team. They went 6-5. There's a lot of complicating factors, and like I said, I mean, it's hard for me to sit here and render a verdict on it. So, it's. We'll talk about this in the future. Next Tuesday, we'll have some more end of season thoughts, and if they play a bowl game, then after that we'll have some more end of season thoughts. Let's see here. Chris Bruno says maybe it's Pitt recruiting a little more these days in Georgia Tech's territory. Yeah, Pitt's getting some time. Pitt's making progress in the Atlanta area. Pitt's making progress in Georgia. They've gotten some recruits out of there in the last 2 years. They've got a couple commitments from Georgia this year, and it's a fertile area. It's a talent hotbed in Georgia and in Atlanta, and it's a place that I think if you're Pitt or a lot of schools, you need to go there and you need to work on, because there are a lot of good players. And, having a game every other year, or in this case, back-to-back years in Atlanta, certainly doesn't help when you're trying to, or certainly doesn't hurt when you're trying to recruit players from the state of Georgia or players from Atlanta. And that is, I think it's a good step that Pitt has made in recruiting. When you talk about expanding your recruiting footprint, it's a good place to go. All right, final question. David Allen says, is the plan for 2021 ACC schedule to revert to what would have been this year? Will we have the ACC schedule in 2021 that we would have had in 2020 pre-COVID? It's interesting, David, I think there are a lot of questions about what the ACC schedule is going to be. All right, David, you asked another question. I'm going to get to that too. But, on your first question, I don't think anybody knows what the ACC schedule is going to look like next year. I hadn't heard or hadn't really considered the possibility of just taking what was supposed to be the 2020 schedule and just moving it forward a year and playing it in 2021. More likely, it would seem to me that they just go back to what the 2021 schedule was supposed to be. Although I've often said I think it'll be really interesting to see if the ACC decides to use this sort of bump in the road with the schedule as an opportunity to remake the schedule matrix and the format of the schedule, whether going to a 9-game conference schedule or mixing up the divisions or changing the deal with the permanent crossover opponents or however you want to switch things around. It'd be really interesting to see if the ACC decides now, because they've got this unique year where things have sort of been turned upside down and they've missed out on, or the schedules have been jumbled up this year, that use that as a chance to go into next year and really revamp how the ACC scheduling matrix works. So I don't know what they're going to do next year. I haven't seen anything definitive from the ACC. It'll be interesting to see what the conference decides. All right, and David Allen, your last thing says, wow, the verdict on the season is simple. It's a total failure. Why are you changing your standard from earlier in the season? You're right. So, I said right away, this season has been a disappointment. At 6-5, it's a disappointment because they lost to Boston College and NC State, and I'm not changing that opinion. That is the verdict. But I think as we move further away from it, we'll be able to put more perspective on the impact of the pandemic, the impact of COVID, the impact of the testing, the impact of the changed schedule, the impact of all the context that goes around everything that we talk about in 2020. And I think we'll be able to take a longer view on it and really kind of put this season into proper perspective, put the season in the proper context of what it means to have happened when it happened. But either way, they finished the regular season at 6-5. We'll see if they go to a bowl game. I don't know if they will or not, but they beat Georgia Tech in the regular season finale, 34-20. It wasn't always pretty, but they ended up coming away with a 2-touchdown win and one of the best running back performances we've seen in the last 5 years. Certainly the best running back performance by an individual since 2017 at the earliest. So not too much to complain about there. All right, we will have lots of stuff, lots of coverage on Panther-Lair.com going throughout the weekend. Of course, we have the Panthers Insider Show on 93.7 The Fan on Saturday morning at 8 a.m. Make sure you tune in for that. We'll talk football, basketball, and recruiting. Next week, National Letter of Intent Signing Day is on Wednesday, so we got a lot to talk about on the Tuesday night podcast. We'll be live at 8:30 p.m. right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You can tune in for our live signing day preview show. You don't want to miss that. Ask all your questions and comments, everything you want to say or know about Pitt's recruiting class. We will talk about it right here on the Panther-Lair Show, Tuesday night, 8:30 p.m., youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, stay tuned to the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You can find it all right there at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Thanks, everybody, for jumping in on the live stream tonight. It's fun to talk to you guys after a game. We enjoy it. I'm glad we did that this season. It's been a lot of fun to do it, and we will definitely do it again next year. And, everybody listen to the podcast. We appreciate it. So stay tuned to everything at Panther-Lair.com. Have a great end of the week. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you again soon.